Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food. And I do this by sharing what I've been doing in my own allotment and my own garden. Now, January is a bit of a funny month, I think. The new year brings with it a new, fresh desire to grow more food and to start cracking on with the garden. But you may have noticed here in the UK, the weather has been a little bit cold over this last week, making gardening very, very difficult. However, that hasn't stopped me. I have set myself some goals that I want to hit throughout January, and I've been making progress on those goals. So come with me down the allotment where we will get started. Well, it's bitterly cold on the allotment, and quite rarely for my area, we've actually got a really heavy frost. And in fact, the weather this week has meant that there's been a lot of cold weather, a lot of frost, and even a sprinkling of snow, which for my area is incredibly rare. Now, I am the type of person that believes we should get out in the garden and tackle a few jobs, whatever the weather. The only time I really don't like being out in the garden or on the allotment is when it rains. But it's not raining, it's just cold. So I've came down the allotment and I've wrapped up warm, good welly boots, good hat, good gloves, and that has meant I can tackle a few tasks on the allotment. Now, for me, this time of year is all about trying to get a lot of the infrastructure jobs done so that we can make a good start when the garden season really ramps up, when the weather gets better and we can really get out in the garden. So things like building beds, building sheds, those sort of things are a great thing to do in these winter months. Now, on the allotment, pretty much everything is built. There is one more bed that we do need to build, which we might do in the next couple of weeks. So, infrastructure-wise, there's nothing that needs being built. However, I do have areas of my allotment that have given me trouble over the last few years, and those are the areas that I'm concentrating on at the moment. So right at the very top of my allotment, I've got a fruit area where we have gooseberries, blackberries, currant bushes, all planted up. I inherited this area when I took on that plot. But it does run alongside my neighbour's plot. And as I've said time and time again, my neighbours haven't visited their allotment at all this year. And their plot has got rather overgrown, leaving me with loads of weeds coming into my fruit area. Now, last week I went into that area, I trimmed the grass right back, cut back a load of brambles that were also coming over, and just tried to tidy it up as much as I possibly could. And then I laid down loads of cardboard to suppress any weeds. Now, in the past I've done this with wood chip and things like that, and it's worked quite well. The only trouble, as I say, is keeping on top of it. So what I will do moving forward, every time I come to the allotment, that's the first area I will look at in order to try and keep on top of it. Make sure that I'm constantly weeding out and tidying up that area. The problem will be that my neighbour's plot is still rather overgrown. The council have now repossessed it. So the new allotment holders will hopefully take it on and they will hopefully tidy it up so that it makes my life a lot easier and it won't let that plot go to waste. It's a shame because there's 2 greenhouses on there. There's a lot of good stuff, a shed that is just going to waste. Not forgetting the fruit trees and bushes that are on there as well. So they planted loads of plants up. They just didn't use it. It's really annoying. But the area I've been focusing on today has been behind my greenhouses. Now, again, behind my greenhouses has been an area where things have been a little difficult. It's because it's behind the greenhouses, it's a case of being out of sight, out of mind. We used to have raspberries when I first took on this plot growing down in these beds, and I actually built beds around them to try and protect the raspberries, but eventually the raspberries died out. I've grown potatoes in this area in the past as well, but again, the trouble with it has just been that it's out of sight, out of mind. It's hidden behind my greenhouse, so I don't check on it enough. And because of that, couch grass and brambles had crept in. Now, I knew they weren't too serious. We just needed to spend a bit of time to really get on top of them. And again, I should have done that throughout last year. What I did today was cut back all the grass and cut back all the brambles so that we were left with bare soil. Now, this is actually quite tricky when the soil is frozen like we have at the moment. But what I found, using my hoe, actually worked quite well. We couldn't go into the soil, it just cut the top off all these plants rather easily. So I did that, scooped up all these weeds, threw them in the compost bin, and that left me with perfectly good soil. Now, of course, there are going to be roots and root seeds in that soil as well, which are going to come back. But what I decided to do is I had some black weed suppressing membrane in my shed. Now, I used black weed suppressing membrane a lot in the past. But in recent years, I decided not to use it because of the fact that it is, one, a plastic, and two, my neighbours had it on their plot when they were tending their plot. One winter, the weed suppressor membrane got blown up in the wind and got caught in my gooseberry bushes. And to this day, several years down the line now, there's still these bits of black plastic ribbon in my gooseberry bushes, which are really, really difficult to get rid of. So I don't like weed suppressing membrane for that reason, but I hate waste even more. So what I decided to do, I would lay down this weed suppressing membrane over these beds, but make sure they're weighed down properly. Now, to weigh them down, what I've used are some concrete drain pipes that I had. These things slot together. I've used them for growing potatoes in the past. They're about 30 centimetres tall, 30 centimetres wide. And they're pretty heavy. I got them from my step-grandfather when he passed away, and I've been thinking of how I could use them. For potatoes, they were pretty good actually, because they're stackable and could create some decent size potatoes. But my other thought was I could actually use them for growing fruit bushes and things in the future. But what I've decided to do this year, because this area has been quite a tricky area to maintain, I've decided I'm going to leave the black weed suppressing membrane down in place for the entire year, way down with these concrete blocks. But inside these concrete blocks, I'm going to fill them up with compost, and then we're going to plant our squashes into this area. So this is going to be courgettes, pumpkins, butternut squash, those sort of things, which will probably thrive quite well here. The black weed suppressing membrane, of course, will warm up the soil below, which will bring those weed seeds and everything up to germinate. But because they're not going to get any light, they're going to die off quite quickly. Which should mean that next year, we can peel off this weed suppressing membrane, and that should leave us with some good soil in which we can grow. Fingers crossed that's going to work out how I hope. Now, the other targets I really want to hit throughout January here on the allotment. Firstly, that building a bed that I mentioned earlier. This is going to be a simple job, just 4 wooden pieces screwed together to form a rectangle. Going to try and keep it the same size as my other beds, but I'm worried it might be a little bit close to my shed. But that's not going to take too long. It's just one of those things I need to get on and do. Other areas that I'm concentrating on, my raspberry bed needs a good weed, which is going to take a while because there's a lot of couch grass in that. We've got raspberries growing in there, but I just need to really remove all the weeds in that area. And another thing that I want to concentrate on is where my elder tree is, and alongside the northern side. I want to tidy it up, that area, and try and put a compost bin over my elder tree so that it doesn't start to sprout back. As you know, we cut back the elder tree in November, December last year, and I really don't want it to grow back, so I'm going to have to really try and find a way, short of digging out the roots, which is going to be impossible on the clay soil that I have here. But that's what we really want to do, is get that elder tree completely gone. Might as well put a compost bin on it to block out any light, and hopefully that will get rid of it fairly soon. It means we're not going to be able to use that area for growing, but we need somewhere to create compost anyway. So that might be an area we really get sorted next year. Overall, I think the allotment doesn't need that much work. Other than a good tidy up, I think the allotment is ready for the growing season. Of course, we got garlic, which is all germinated, even the elephant garlic, which are all looking good and strong as well. So things are growing quite well. Same with our onions. We have got things growing on the allotment and proving us that this allotment will be productive. Towards the end of the month as well, we're going to have to start prepping the potato beds, but these are all things that we'll document later on in this month. Right, I need a nice warm cup of coffee, so I'm going to head on home and I'll meet you back out in my garden. Well, I hope you're enjoying this podcast so far. If you are, then please consider leaving a rating and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us and it helps us get found by more people. Now, if you are also enjoying this podcast and you want to help keep it running, then please consider becoming a member of our Supporters Club. It costs just £5 a month to be a member of our Supporters Club, but for that £5 a month, you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcasts, which give you a few ideas of what we're doing here at the Veg Grower Podcast. Added to that, once a month you will also receive our seed pack through your letterbox. And this seed pack contains several packs of seeds that can be sown in that very month. And also a copy of our mini newspaper, which gives you a few ideas of how to sow the seeds and a few tasks that you might want to do yourself throughout that month. And all that is just £5 a month. If that is something you would be interested in, then head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk to find out more. To give you an idea of what seeds you will get in this pack, over this last week we have sown some basil seeds. Basil is a fantastic herb that I absolutely love growing, and also some sweet pepper seeds. Sweet pepper is one of those seeds that I think everybody should grow from seed, but they do need quite a long growing period in order to be successful. So once again, if that is something you would be interested in, then head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. And now let's get back to the gardening. Well, I'm back in the kitchen garden here at home now. Now I've got to say that the kitchen garden at home is a little bit more scruffy than the allotment. The allotment, I've already said, don't think is going to take long, but the kitchen garden here at home, it's going to need a lot of work. I would say over 2024, I focused a little bit too much on the allotment and not enough on what we were doing here at home. And it just looks a little bit on the scruffy side. So what I've been doing is just identifying the key areas that I really want to get up to scratch. And this started, of course, in the greenhouse over Christmas, where I've removed the growing beds inside, filled those up with gravel, and we're going to growing in autopots or pots inside there, which we've completed that particular area. So that is ready to go, which is quite important because the greenhouse is going to start coming into its own over the coming weeks, what with various plants that we're going to be sowing, if we haven't sown them already, of course. Outside the greenhouse, I've got two trees, one being the elder tree, the other we believe to be an ash tree. Now the elder tree, I don't really like the idea of removing it, but it is showing signs of dying anyway, and it is quite large for this garden. And the reason I don't want to remove it, of course, is that it does produce an edible crop, but I think we're just going to go with it and get rid of it. That one's not going to be too difficult. The ash tree, however, is going to be a bit of a problem, so I'm going to have to get somebody in to actually remove that tree, I think. And in front of that, of course, we got the chickens, and what I've been doing this weekend is just letting the chickens have a little bit more light. Just in front of the chickens is where I had my herb garden. This was where I planted some sage plants and other plants, marjoram, oregano, rosemary, etc., etc. In front of there, thinking that it would just give the chickens a little bit of protection, a little bit of somewhere to hide. But the trouble was the plants just got too big and they didn't let any light into the chickens at all. The plants were also getting so big that they covered the entire path as well. So I've cut those right back to the roots, letting in more light to the chickens, and they seem a lot happier because they look like they can now just see what's going on in the garden. We of course do let the chickens out around the garden from time to time, but just letting them have more light when they're in the coop makes more sense. Does mean they're not as protected in strong winds, but we worry about that when I see it being a problem. Good thing is I use Allotment, as you're probably aware, the chicken run manufacturer Allotment. And they do actually have things that we can add onto these runs to protect the chickens from winds. So we've got plenty of options there. Now, as January is an infrastructure month, like I said, it's certainly a month for building sheds. One of the things that I've been talking about doing is actually replacing my old shed and putting in its place a potting shed. I haven't got around to ordering this potting shed yet, so it might be a little delayed on my plans for doing it. It's something I really should be doing though, and I'm going to try and crack on with that. But what I'm doing instead is just slowly emptying everything out of that shed and disassembling it so that I can get the footings, the base for that particular area just right. Now, this is a bit of a challenge, as I'm sure you are aware. The thing is with a shed, this shed has been here nearly 10 years now. One of the first things I put up when I moved into this garden, and I had a lot of troubles with the shed when I put it in. What I want to do is obviously empty everything out, and I keep a lot of junk for some reason, but what we're going to get rid of the stuff that we don't need and just keep the stuff that we do need, and being very strict with myself on that. I put this shed on a base of shingle and stones, but I think, judging by the way the floor has bowed, stuff has shifted underneath there. Now, this could be animals burying underneath there, creating homes and stuff. For all I know, I don't know until I remove this shed. And I debated about putting a concrete base in place, which would be more permanent, probably would last quite a long time and be solid. But what worries me about that is drainage issues. I'm on a clay soil here, so it gets very wet and very poor drainage. So my current thinking is that instead of concrete, I'm going to lay down a load of shingle and then slabs on which the shed will stand on. Slabs will be placed right where the shed floor supports will be. What I'm hoping then is that that's going to help with the drainage, meaning that the shed is less likely to rot from the base, meaning that the shed will last a lot longer as well. And I'm also hoping that means it's less likely that any animals are going to burrow dens underneath the shed as well, because it's shingle. It's not going to be very comfortable for them. It's all pie in the sky at the moment, all plans, but it's what we are looking at doing. Now, of course, a few years ago, you might recall, I built a shed at the top of our garden from scratch, and this was built to my specifications, to my own design. That shed still stands, actually, and that is my main shed. I've got to say, when I built that shed, I had a lot of fun building it. I really enjoyed doing it, and it worked out much cheaper than buying a shed. These days, the price of wood is so much more expensive that building a shed from scratch doesn't make financial sense anymore. I've done a lot of costs and what have you. It just doesn't make sense. However, that shed is doing very well. I've got to say, it's standing proud. It's lasting longer than my old shed. What it is going to need is a good lick of treatment paint, just to freshen it up a little and make it look a little less tired. Again, this is something I think we can do on dry days. We often do get dry days in January. It will take a long time to dry out completely, but that's not a huge problem. We can cope with that. We can deal with that. What we have to make sure when we do paint it, though, is that it is going to be dry for quite a few weeks. and I would actually start painting it in the morning so that it has all day to do most of the drying, and then when it does get damp towards the evening, it's going to be less of a problem. Now, there are a few other structures in this garden that also need some attendance. One of the things that I built a few years ago was a trellis wall alongside my patio, in which we've grown tayberries and blackberries against it. The tayberries and blackberries need a damn good prune, I've got to say. But the actual structure itself has started leaning over, so I need to really remove that back out and start again with that, which is another one of these infrastructure jobs that we need to do throughout this month as well. Lots that we can be getting on with. We just need the decent dry weather, which is coming. It is coming. Right, it's starting to get a little bit nippy and a little bit too dark to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to head on inside to the podding shed with a nice hot cup of coffee. In the meantime, let's find out what Chef Scott has for us this week.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef Scott with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Hi, it's Scott here with this week's recipe. And this week we have the seed of the month recipe. And as you will know, this month's seed is rhubarb, something I haven't grown from seed before. So I'm looking forward to sowing some of the Supporters Club seeds and giving it a go. And I think every garden or allotment should have rhubarb. Because it's so versatile, I use it in sweet and savoury dishes and think it goes amazingly well with pork and mackerel. Which brings us to this week's recipe. Hot smoked mackerel pâté with pickled rhubarb, radish and rocket. And with the addition of some toasted sourdough bread, this recipe makes a lovely light lunch. So, let's head to the kitchen and hear how it's made. As usual, you can find this recipe and others on the Veg Grower Podcast.co.uk and on my Instagram page, Seeds Table Plot 13. For this recipe, you will need, for the pâté, 200 grams of skinless hot smoked mackerel, 100 grams of cream cheese, 50 grams of creme fraiche, the zest and juice of 1 lime, 1 teaspoon of horseradish sauce or 1 teaspoon of grated fresh horseradish, and for the pickled rhubarb, 100 grams of diced rhubarb, 100 grams of cider vinegar, 100 grams of water and 100 grams of caster sugar, and for the garnish, rocket and sliced radish. Method. Start by making the pâté by blending all the pâté ingredients together in a food processor or by just beating everything together with a spoon and remembering to season with salt and pepper. Now make the pickled rhubarb by bringing the vinegar, water and sugar to the boil and then pouring over the rhubarb and allowing to cool. Now serve on toasted bread and garnish with the rhubarb, rocket and radish. And that's the recipe done. And that's it from me this week.
Well, what another delicious recipe from Scott. Sounds a little unusual, but something I've learned with rhubarb is that rhubarb is incredibly versatile. We have found that rhubarb goes really well with pork, but also great in crumbles, and as Scott has also said, with pâté and mackerel. Interesting thing, rhubarb, isn't it? That's why it's our seed of the month, and I think it is absolutely fantastic. Now, I thought I would just share with you a bit of a seed update. We're growing lots of plants from seed this year, like we do most years, to be honest with you. And I've got to admit that already, even though this is only the second week in January, my heated propagators are rammed full of seeds and seedlings. I'm actually worried that we're going to run out of space. Now, my habanero chilies that we sowed in December, they are already out of the propagator. So the seeds sown, they germinated, we pricked them out, pot them into individual pots, and they are taking up so much room that they had to get out from under the heat. Now, they are sitting still under grow lights, but they are not under any heat. Indoors, of course, in our kitchen, which can get quite cold, if I'm honest with you. So I'm a little worried about them. They do seem, however, to be coping okay. So seems okay. I'm just worried and keeping a close eye on them. Obviously, we've had some cold weather this week, but if they continue to grow, we will be okay. Our aubergines, chilies and onions, they have all germinated, and many of these are probably going to need pricking out this week just to give them a bit more room to grow. Really surprised with these because these all really grew really strongly, the little seedlings, I have to say, and I'm really pleased with them, it has to be said. What I've noticed is that the leaves on these are looking incredibly green, and I think that's because they are under some good strong grow lights, and I'm just hoping that's going to continue when we prick them out and give them all a little bit more space. We've also just got our lettuce starting to show their head as well, so they're going to need to be kept a close eye on. These are a winter type lettuce, and hopefully they're going to grow just as well. Eventually they will go outside because they can tolerate the colder weather. We just got to harden them off before they go outside. So overall, I've got to say that all these plants, all these seedlings are doing really well. Obviously, these are indoors where they are warm. Outside, apart from the lettuce, I don't think any of these would survive at all. And again, that strong green growth, which is always a good sign, is due to having these grow lights. There are some of the other seeds that we are still waiting on to germinate. AI said to sow some of these seeds this week and over the coming weeks as well. As you know, we're doing an experiment where we've asked AI to write a seed list for every week for 2025 in order to sow seeds to see if it works. It's interesting, it did say to sow tomatoes this week, and I've always said that January is too early to sow tomatoes. I know many packets of seeds will say to sow tomatoes, but my impression is that those seeds that can be sown in January are generally aimed for those that have heated greenhouse where they will eventually go. Of course, grow lights and heated propagators are a must when sowing at this time of year for these sort of plants as well. But a heated greenhouse, if you really want early tomatoes, are a must. And the reason I tend to hold off sowing most of my tomatoes until March is that I find that if we sow them now, they grow well, they grow big and strong, but they grow big and then they end up too big before they are going to be strong enough to cope with going into the greenhouse. The greenhouse, of course, here at home is not heated, so it's going to be too cold for them and it will probably kill them off. That's why I tend to hold off until March before they go out. But as I said, AI tells us it's safe to do so. Well, we are coming to the end of this week's podcast. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, then please rate and review on your podcast provider. Only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us. Now, we have had a review on Spotify, but unfortunately, I can't access it at the moment to see what it says. Spotify sometimes does this. I've had one on iTunes as well, but again, I can't see that either. I'm not sure what's going on, but we'll keep a close eye and I'll report back next week what has been said. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you want to help keep it running, then please consider becoming a member of our supporters club. Just £5 a month gives you access to extra behind the scenes podcasts, as well as a collection of seeds that you can be sown in that very month. If you want to get in touch, then of course you can email me, richard@veggrowerpodcast.co.uk, but you can also visit the website, theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, where you can leave a comment on the bottom of a blog post, or you can leave us a voicemail. You can also find me on social media. Just search for the Veg Grower Podcast. We're on pretty much every social media platform. We are doing more on social media at the moment in forms of reels and things like that, so it's well worth checking out. And of course, we do have the Facebook group, which is a great chat because it doesn't need any admin. We just let everybody get on with one another. Everyone has different views and it's always welcome as well, as long as it's done in a polite, respectful way. Well, I think that handles everything that we need. We will be back again next time, so until then, please take care.